Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into one of the most pivotal and, frankly, devastating moments in American history, the Battle of Gettysburg. And we're going to tell this story not just by looking at maps and troop movements, but by listening to the voices of the men who were actually there living through it. Just think about that number for a second. 51,000 casualties in just 3 days. It's staggering. To even begin to understand how this happened, we've got to go back to the start of 1863, a time when confidence in the Confederacy was running incredibly high. So, rewind to early 1863. Confederate General Robert E. Lee, he's feeling pretty optimistic. His Army of Northern Virginia had just handed the Union a major defeat, and now the two armies are just sitting, camped out for the winter on opposite sides of the Rappahannock River. But camped out makes it sound almost peaceful. It was anything but. The conditions were absolutely terrible for both sides. You can just feel the misery and diary entries from soldiers who were freezing with totally inadequate supplies. But here's the thing. Despite all that hardship, morale in the Southern camp was, well, it was remarkably high. As one soldier wrote, a lot of them truly believed they were on the verge of becoming a free and independent nation. After another big victory in May, Lee makes this incredibly bold decision. He's going to invade the North. The idea was to let war-torn Virginia recover, and, he hoped, to force one final war-ending battle on Northern soil. And what came next? Well, it was this grueling march north. You have to picture it, both armies moving in parallel, almost like two giant serpents slithering up the map, and the soldiers, they were just pushed to their absolute limits. And, I mean, look at these numbers. They give you a real sense of the sheer, brutal endurance this took. These guys were marching incredible distances in suffocating heat before a single shot was even fired at Gettysburg. So yeah, the two armies were on a collision course. Then, on June 30th, Union General John Buford's cavalry spots Confederate forces near a small town called Gettysburg. He quickly sets up a defensive line and sends a very stark message. The Confederates are 4 miles from my position. The fuse was lit. So, July 1st, what started as just a small skirmish, almost an accidental encounter, well, it quickly spiraled completely out of control. It became the largest battle ever fought in North America, just like that. And in the middle of all this massive chaos, you get these incredibly human, heartbreaking stories. Take Sergeant Amos Humiston. He's mortally wounded on that first day, and he dies clutching the only thing he has to identify him, a photo of his 3 children. That picture ended up in newspapers across the country, which is how his wife eventually found out what had happened to him. By the end of the day, the Confederates held the town of Gettysburg. But, and this is a huge but, a critical decision by one general who hesitated when ordered to take the high ground may have cost them the entire battle. It's one of history's great what-ifs. On day 2, the battle just explodes into some of the most famous and, frankly, ferocious fighting of the entire war. Lee was determined to push the Union Army off those hills they now held. Both sides were dealing with absolute chaos. Lee was furious, basically operating blind without his cavalry, his eyes and ears. At the same time, a Union general disobeyed orders, creating a huge gap in their line that nearly led to a complete disaster. The fighting was just unimaginably savage. As General Longstreet put it, it was some of the most bloody and heroic fighting of the entire war. By the time night fell, the Union line had been pushed back. It had bent, but it hadn't broken. Okay, so now we're on day 3. Lee is convinced he's on the verge of victory, that he's almost won. So he decides to risk everything on one final, massive gamble, a frontal assault right against the center of the Union line. Now, this was a moment of incredible tension in the Confederate command. Lee's most trusted general, James Longstreet, he fundamentally disagreed with the plan. He thought it was a suicide mission and argued against it, but he was ordered to do it anyway. To soften up the Union defenses, Lee unleashed this thunderous artillery bombardment. We're talking about the largest artillery barrage in North American history. The sound was heard up to 70 kilometers away, and it was so powerful it caused gunners' ears to bleed. And this gets to the brutal technology of the war. Weapons like the mini A-ball weren't just bullets. They were designed to be absolutely catastrophic. They would flatten on impact and shatter bone, which meant that even if a wound wasn't immediately fatal, it often led to a gruesome choice: The result of this new weaponry was an overwhelmed medical system. Battlefield surgeons, who were called sawbones for a reason, worked in horrific conditions with a pretty grim success rate. Only about half the soldiers who underwent an amputation survived. Just as Longstreet had predicted, the charge was a massacre, a complete and utter disaster. The Confederate Army was broken. There's this image of a devastated General Lee riding among the survivors, just repeating over and over, "It is all my fault." The battle was over, but the suffering, that was far from over. Lee's army began a miserable, painful retreat south, hounded by Union forces the whole way. Even the victors were at their absolute breaking point. You have Union soldiers talking about marching for days without shoes, completely exhausted. Meanwhile, the wagon train carrying the Confederate wounded was 24 kilometers long. Both armies were starving and utterly spent. So, Gettysburg was the turning point, no doubt. It proved Lee could be beaten. And yet, it didn't end the war. Not even close. It raged on for 2 more bloody years. And that really leaves us with a final thought. What's the immense cost of not just defeating an army, but extinguishing the cause for which it fights?